Thank you for that. Has a cutoff rate been determined yet in this PEA, or is that something that you will discover more or less in the pre-feasibility or feasibility study?
No, no, there is a cutoff grade in the. Of course, we're half our values in gold and half in silver. So typically, there's something called an NSR cutoff, which is essentially dollars per ton. It's which you can convert into gold terms if you like. But yes, all PEAs contemplate a cost of mining, a cost of milling, a cost of creating the metal essentially, in order to calculate what is potentially economic or not. So yeah, all those studies involve a cutoff grade.
Okay. Now I know you're excited about the updated PEA. Let's get into that a little bit further if we can.
Sure.
Let's talk about the highlights and what really gets you excited about the most recent release here 10 days ago.
Keep in mind that a PEA is an early stage study, and there's caveats and certain disclosures that are required for good reason. It's an early stage study that is designed to show the potential of a deposit to be economic, and that's why you do the more involved, detailed studies. This PEA shows that a lot of questions from our last PEA. Keep in mind that our last PEA a year ago was done at 1320 gold, for example,
Hmm.
and today we're well below that, and that's unfortunate for the all shareholders of all gold companies. But it's happened just as we were putting out our first studies, this decline in metal prices. So an obvious question for a shareholder before this recent PEA would be, okay, I saw your PEA of last year, but gold is off, $300 from when you put this out. So can you tell me how your deposit looks at these much lower metal prices? So that's really what's exciting about this PEA is again, it's early stage study that it has inherent risk with it, and we need more detailed studies to be more certain of these conclusions. But that all being said, it looks like it has great potential at even these metal prices. So I think that's what's really important. Is we knew that we had some higher grade material near surface for various technical reasons. We thought that there was, again, it's a smaller mine at these lower metal prices, but we thought there was something potentially exciting about this deposit even at lower metal prices. So we're very pleased to be able to communicate that to shareholders.
Yes, and the initial capital I think is now what is it, roughly a little bit over 100 million that's going to be required.
Yeah, almost exactly 100 million, and the last PEA contemplated 240 odd million. So a big decrease in initial capital. The savings were realized through the option agreement with the Rock Creek Mill and other. Obviously, it's a smaller mine plan, so it doesn't. It's not as the initial capital is um, is smaller as well. So um, yeah, it makes a big difference in the economics to be able to reduce the initial capital.
And also, the in reference to the initial capital, one of the questions I had asked to me by one of the members of the audience is that they were concerned about why were PPMs, which are private placement memorandums, issued for Almaden. Could you touch on that briefly versus why was it not, why was to receive the capital, why do you not consider mezzanine financing or other forms of financing? What would you touch on that, please?
Why do we do private placements as opposed to, say, debt financing or
Yes,
something along those lines?
right. Because one of the
Well,
questions essentially was is why didn't you pursue debentures versus uh, the share dilution, which is that was a concern to them, and I figured that the best time to answer the question would be with you actually addressing it versus myself. So,
well, I think I mean, obviously, I'm a big shareholder, and I don't relish dilution either, so I can certainly understand the sentiment. We To go into debt when you have no revenue. We're an exploration company. We have no revenue. There's no
mhm.
means of paying back the debt. I think that would be highly imprudent, and there's a very good track record of companies who take on debt without revenue and are unable to service the debt. So I think that would, I mean, to me, that is a non-starter. It's not impossible. There's many people who would like to, who probably would be interested with very stringent security provisions on your. I mean, you can imagine if a company is gonna, if somebody's gonna loan you money when you don't have any revenue, um, uh, they'll find a way to do it as they must in a way that could jeopardize the assets of the company. And so, yeah, I think it would be widely. I would imagine that anyone you would ask, if you were to ask somebody like Rick Rule, that he would agree with me that that would be imprudent from the company's point of view. So really, we are advancing a property, and we're trying to do it as cheaply as we possibly can by owning our own drills, by finding things like this option to acquire the Rock Creek mill. But at the end of the day, we don't have revenue, and in order to advance the property, we have to finance the company, and we think that the obvious way to do that is the most prudently and cautiously through private placements. That's we are a public company, and we have that ability.
So as you mentioned, Morgan, Rick Rule is very, very particular on management, and I've had private discussions with him, and I know he said this in the public domain as well, that he speaks very highly of the management here at Almaden Minerals and Almadex Minerals. So speaking specifically of yourself and your father, and as you just mentioned, it was very prudent to procure that capital through using private placement memorandums. And as Rick likes to mention, and I'll leave it on this note, is that companies that procure financing through debentures and don't have any revenue, they end up going to mining heaven. And you're a company that has staying power. And I always refer to a company such as yourself as a generational company. Your symbols, your companies are going to remain in my portfolio for years to come because of the management. It's just been phenomenal what your work that you've done. So kudos to you. And again, I'm somewhat paraphrasing what Rick Rule shares his sentiments as well. If we go back to the PEA briefly here, the net present value, has that? Would you like to share that?
Sure. Yeah, that was. I mean, obviously, net present values at a PE level are calculated. There's contingencies and there's assumptions. So it's an early stage study, and that number should be treated as such an early stage study result with many assumptions. But that being said, we've done several studies here, and we're moving towards more advanced studies. We showed financial metrics, internal rates of return, NPVs, and net present value calculations at various different metal prices. And we think what this new study shows is the potential for this deposit to provide a good rate of return and be valuable at these lower metal prices that we find ourselves in. That's what those numbers allude to.
Okay. And I like to just somewhat switch gears. As we investors, we love to see numbers, but sometimes what you don't see is the intangibles. And one of the intangibles, and I know your personality, I know you somewhat, sir. I hope I'm not going to take anything that you would say out of context, but you're not going to toot your own horn, but I will. The company has done some remarkable work within the community as well. And I definitely wanted to highlight that because it speaks volumes for the ethos that you and your father have instilled in the company. Let's discuss briefly what was done in September in reference to maternity wards and employments in the community and wheelchairs that were provided to the community. That doesn't make the news. It doesn't hit the big screens, and it doesn't sound too sexy for investors. But let's discuss that briefly because your relationship is key. A good relationship with the community there, it fosters a long-term covenant that can be very prosperous. But if you don't do that groundwork and establish that relationship and ensure that you're there for the long-term interests of that community, things can really fizzle out. So please touch on that if you would.
Sure. Keep in mind we're a prospecting company that doesn't just arrive when after a mine has been found. We're there before a mine exists, so we're the first people there. And there's an old saying that I think is true with anybody. First impressions are pretty important, and if you leave a negative first impression, um, you can tarnish any relationship. Our view is there's lots of acronyms and there's lots of checklists and there's lots of agencies and organizations that determine whether or not you're meeting CSR standards, which stands for is one of these acronyms around community relations. And so, look, our view is that those are all fine, and certainly our relationship with the local community is it's important to our shareholders are very pleased for us to make the kind of donations and be involved in the community in a helpful way. But the most helpful thing that we can do in our mind is to build a mine for these communities and create long-term source of jobs and wealth.
Hmm.
So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, uh, it's mining is in general viewed in the media very negatively. There's a generally speaking, the average person in society has a negative view on mining, and we think that's poorly placed and based on a lack of knowledge about mining. In fact, our view is that many people who go to mines or who are opposed to mines have never been to one and
Hmm.
actually don't know the precise nature of what they're opposed to. So we recognize that that's a reality of society. So it's first principles for us. We would be doing this independent of anti-mining activity, which we find around the world, and that is just simply to personally have a relationship with the people in the communities where you're working, to treat them as you would expect to be treated yourself, and to be very transparent and open about precisely what you're trying to do. We're working in rural and poor areas, so it's very important to us and our shareholders to make meaningful contributions that we can make at this stage, help with local needs. But again, ultimately, the best thing we can do for these communities is to bring about a long-term source of employment and wealth. And the best way to ensure that that's successful is to make sure that local people understand who you are, what your objectives are, and what are the realities of a mining development, which will involve a lot of change in a community. And so we've come up with the idea of taking people on a bus, 20, 30 at a time, and driving them to an actual mine site where there's actual mining, similar to what the kind of mining that could come about at Ixtaca. And we've done that with 17 busloads of people. Over 300 people have gone on these mine tours, and we take them and show them open pits, show them tailings facilities, show them mills, and in many cases introduce them to members of the local community where that mine exists. And we have nothing to hide. We think that mining is a wonderful industry that provides intergenerational wealth and training and has a very low impact on the environment, but a major direct and indirect employment impact. And the metals are in society forever. They're infinitely sustainable because they can be recycled over and over and over again. So to explain to them the nature of what we're trying to do and be open and transparent and to treat them essentially like they the reality of the situation is that really at the end of the day it's their decision to make, and we respect them enough to give them the opportunities to make their own informed decisions and to empower them to do so through showing them the realities. A lot of where things go wrong, in my mind, is that it's just a lack of respect. And it may not even come about through anything negative, a lack of respect. It's just a lack of good relationships are developed, and you know, um, pointing at maps on a wall and say we're going to do this or that or the other thing, that can be challenging. Don't talk over people's heads, go and show them. And so that's what we've tried to do. And we don't take our relationships for granted, but we're very hopeful that people understand very well what we're trying to do, and we think we've generated a lot of support on that basis.
Yeah, much of what you said really resonates with me. It's open, it's transparent, and just stepping back at a 10,000-foot view, it's a win-win proposition for everyone involved because you hire local residents as well, which is something I know you didn't really touch too much on. But so it's a win-win proposition, as you mentioned, as the mine gets constructed and fully gets developed. I'd like to go ahead and share with the listeners here your websites, both of them, if you would please, and how can they get in contact with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is info@almadenminerals.com. The emails will get right through to me that way, or they're free to call the company if they have specific questions. We're happy to speak to shareholders and prospective shareholders. 604-689-7644 is our number in Vancouver at the office, and if I'm in the office, usually do my best to chat. So thanks very much, Maurice, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Morgan, thank you again. I know you're a very busy man, and all the best to you here in 2016.
Likewise, Maurice, happy Christmas and all the best next year.
Take care, sir.
The information presented on Proven and Probable is provided for educational and informational purposes only, without any express or implied warranty of any kind, including warranties of accuracy, completeness, or fitness for any particular purpose. The information is not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice, or any other advice. You should not make any financial, investment, or trading decision based on any of the information presented without first undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional broker.